Yep. So it begins. Just waiting for Anna and Frank to both come on. Good. Thank you for letting me know that. Awesome. Let me do that one. Thanks, Keith.
Hi, welcome back to Gamescape 3D. Today we're going to do a speed paint of one of our little peasant houses to show how easy these things are to paint. Here's the peasant house I have to paint today. It has been primered black. Okay, so we're all ready to go.
Hey, Chuck.
So I got about 3 minutes into it so far. We got the base, we got the roof, and then we have
All right.
a few smaller components.
Sounds good.
I have flat boards here for the loft, and then I got a little
Sounds like a plan.
itty bitty window parts there, and then I have a hood for the flue up on the roof, and this could be resin printed or FDM printed. And then lastly, we have a little ragtag door to put on the front with a filament hinge. All right. In terms of prepping the models, sometimes these little holes where the filament's supposed to run through can get clogged up on your resin doors. Sometimes the resin will just settle in there when it's washing out and kind of harden. Sometimes with these doors, it might just be a little off.
Everything's going.
You might need to
checking
clean it out.
everything.
If you do, you can use a drill bit. 5/64 is the size you need to clean out.
It's actually it says 340 in chat, which
so if I have a door there, I might just.
All right, let's see.
So we got those holes cleaned out. Should be plenty of room for our filament. And we will continue on. All right, the first thing I'm going to be doing is applying brown onto the timber
I did tell him
frames.
650, so.
And I'm going to use a pretty good sized brush. I don't care about getting brown everywhere.
Well, 650 I'll put on the troller at that, and then we'll go from there.
So there's my brown again. Kind of on the lighter side of a mid-tone. Now I don't want to use so much brown that I'm filling in the details, of course. And if some of the black primer comes through, that's all the better. You definitely don't want to waste your time creating an even coat around this.
Hey, darling.
It'll actually take away from it in the end, and it's kind of just a waste of time. You can go do something else.
A true legend on tonight.
Do make sure you kind of hit the tops and the bottoms of your timbers, okay? Don't just paint the face of these things, because you're not going to be coming back later to hit these sides. This is kind of the last time they should be getting painted, unless you absolutely have to come back in to do a little touch-up. Okay.
He's been the premier VIP guest at Page the last 2 years when I've been there both years. So finally, timing worked.
No special care being taken.
Pack a check. So we're good.
To keep the wood color off of the plaster parts, or to
verifying
apply this wood color to the plaster parts with any particular intention. And I might glaze over these and let some of those black timber lines come through, kind of dry brush it a little bit as opposed to like a straight paint job. And I might do it both ways. Sometimes I might saturate it a little bit, and sometimes I might just kind of hit the tops and move along. Variation is really the key. You want to paint badly differently all over the place, okay? So you want to avoid painting.
Hit a wrong button. I know I am.
Your repurposed freighter drifts through space. As you stare out at the star-flecked void, another ship comes in. Wait, is this sci-fi? I thought we agreed on a World War II campaign. Oh. Did we? That's cool. I can pivot. The smell of smoke curdles in your nostrils. Hold up, I thought we were prepping for a zombie apocalypse.
Hey, Frank.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, here's what we're doing. It's the year 3700. Humanity's elite fled to other planets long ago, taking with them all forms of advanced technology. Earth survivors scrape by with historic tools as weird phenomena plague abandoned nuclear sites. Witnesses report seeing glowing lights and the dead rising from their graves. And amidst the chaos, three strangers will meet in a dim bar. A veteran zombie slayer, a disgraced general out for revenge,
of course they're
and
gonna
a
get
space
me,
mercenary
Doc,
sent
of
to
course.
investigate the power plants. Now describe your characters.
Of course.
How did you do that? I have the right tools for the job.
All right, let me. We're gonna go. We're gonna get. Sorry, Chuck. Your ad's cut short tonight. Frank, did you meet the Troller guys at Page this year? Any of them?
Probably, but I don't recall. Brief sound check, video okay?
You're good, man. You're good.
Everything's good?
Yeah, you're good. You were good. Gotcha. So, we should have a really nice crowd again tonight. Probably 100 plus people watching live, so.
All good.
Yeah.
I'll give you up front an AMA. You can bring up any topic you like.
Oh.
Hello, Anna. We've met before, but it was like years ago.
Yeah, it was years ago. Yep.
And I had at one point talked with you and others about cartography for my campaign. And I don't know if he forwarded the file to you, but I sent a rough digital copy of my campaign map. The squirrely part of that is that Gary Gygax approved that as being on the planet east of Greyhawk, but we can't say that because the ownership, So we're wrestling with what to do with all that.
Yeah.
We're going to show it tonight. We're going to show it. It's a great map. You know, we'll discuss it. Anything you want to discuss tonight, it's going to be awesome.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, everyone. We're going to come on a few minutes early. Why not?
As you like it.
So, Frank, when you see me, you'll remember we were outside talking at Page this year when weather was bad and talking about our experiences growing up in the Philadelphia area.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a South Jersey guy.
Yeah, I know an awful lot of South Jersey guys, so that doesn't doesn't mean a thing.
All right, here we go. Coming live, everyone. What's up, Jim? Yeah, we got a lot of people coming in, and all right. You know what, Anna? Oh, there we go. Beautiful. Welcome. So, it's been a little while since we had a very, very special guest, and we have one tonight, everyone. As everyone knows, I'm Jay, a.k.a. Lord Gazumba. 45-year Greyhawk campaign and running here with all the other happy stuff that we got going on. With me, the legendary map maker, Anna B. Meyer.
Hello.
As always on a Sunday night, but let's all welcome very special guest, Frank Mentzer. So, Frank, welcome.
Good evening, one and all.
Appreciate you coming on. That outfit, chef's kiss. There you go. That was Michael Zudrak, who works for Frog God, and he was at Page as well. We're probably going to get like 30, 40 people that were at Page that probably say they met you there, and it's really. I got a picture right below me. There'll be some stuff scrolling through of you accepting your award at Page there, your achievement award. So,
well, in a nutshell, when I go to conventions and things, since I'm retired, I'm not there to sell you anything. I'm just there to meet the fans, the gamers, possibly try a game or two, something new. That would always be cool. And they have a nice game library that they're expanding for Page. But I have seen dozens of conventions pop up over the last 40 years, literally. And the ones that make it are the ones that have a tightly integrated staff. You can't predict this. You get people together, and do they click or do they not click? And when they do click, mega things happen. That happened at early Gen Cons. That's happened at certain, there's a convention up in the Northeast, Total Con. And this just happened. This just happened a year ago, and then this year. This brand new convention, and it's going to go mega. It's going to be pulling thousands of people between the location, Central East Coast, but most of all, the quality of the people running it and how they just happen to all click, and everybody is just ecstatic about the results. Everybody's getting on board. All the companies, everybody's going to be showing up here in the next 2 years.
Well, you and I were early birds. We were both there. It was VIP guests the first 2 years, which was awesome. Anna was this year. Troller Games there. I already know. Do you know Eric Boyd at all?
No, not really.
Okay. Yeah, Eric Boyd wrote a lot of the Forgotten Realms deities books. I know he wrote for Polyhedron too. And they asked him, and he's like, Jay, what about this con in the Philly area? I was like, oh yeah, man, you should definitely go next year. So
definitely check it out.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'm happy to join you, and
absolutely.
Say hi to Anna for the first time in years, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
But I've been kind of laying low for several years. There was an internet incident, and it was one of those things where everybody wanted to believe bad news, and they just jumped on a bandwagon, and when nobody really knew anything. And with internet stuff, it's going to be out there forever. So all I could do is put the truth out and then wait for it to die down. And at this point, after like 7-8 years, it's finally died down. Enough people have seen me in public behaving the perfect gentleman I always try to be in public, focusing on the fans, not doing anything untoward or even possibly interpreted as wrong, given the amount of scrutiny that I receive. And the truth will out. That's about all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
And note here, I mean, we keep out of the politics a lot. We're here talking about the game, and all the things that go into, years and years of hard work that everyone's put into and the legacy that everyone's created. And we're really excited about sharing, talking about all your accomplishments here, because I mean they're legendary. It really goes way back. I mean, I started playing when I was 11 years old, in 1978, with Holmes Basic. So it's been a ride, and
I still remember not understanding the game. A friend showed up with the brown box, actually the white box at that time. I got my brown later on. Showed up with this, and it's rules for a medieval war game. Okay, cool. I've played medieval stuff. I had even made my own figures there for a little while, with the kiln in the basement and the pits and, all of that crap. And not for very long. It was too tedious, and I just couldn't deal with it. But we didn't know how the heck this game was to be played, and eventually it was just the two of us looking through it, because we played various board games and things together. A guy named Don Patterson, who's still around, luckily. And so we drove up to King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, to a place called The Last Grenadier, I believe it was. And lo and behold, stumbled on to a D&D game being played. And, epiphany, wow. And that experience stuck with me vividly. Wow. And I carried it over into the 80s when Gary tapped me to write the basic line, Beck Me. And to put that in, to solve that for the first time, really, a step-by-step. Now, Holmes and Mulvey had done that reasonably well to a certain extent, although Holmes, you have to admit, was really winging it. It was the first attempt, other than an original D&D. And it got edited, a lot of things got inserted, pushing everybody towards advanced, because they were planning on these 3 books coming out in just a couple of years. So That Moldvay was really the first serious attempt to do a basic D&D, and that was an outgrowth in part due to the Arneson lawsuits and the fighting about that. That, in a nutshell, was that Gary gave his life, his health, his marriage, all his money at the beginning, everything he could, to make a go at this company with this wacko new game. And Dave said, no, I'm not going to try and stake my life on that and try and make a living. I have other things to do. I have other plans. And the other problem with Dave is that his writing skills just sucked. But he'd be lucky to put a whole paragraph together that was understandable. But he would come up with ideas. He was the proverbial idea man, classic. A lot of his ideas would end up on little scraps of paper, and you add them all up, and it was world-changing because, quite literally, without Dave's input and changes, Gary Gygax would have produced and published the world's best, biggest, grandest, most glorious war game campaign ever seen, just as wargaming was declining.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Gary's obsession with rules-heavy setups carried through then to his other role-playing games later, like Dangerous Journeys. But then he fixed it finally with Legendary Adventures near the end of his life. But that plays fast, simple. Unfortunately, he had a couple other dogs, shall we say, or whatever, less than stellar successes, and people would look back on his initial greatest hits, and they never really gave L.A. Legendary Adventure a try. And I recommend it if you want to try a later Gygax that really exhibits all his skills fine-tuned and getting off of this rule for everything kick so common.
Somehow I have these.
Yeah, those guys, absolutely. Yeah, I produced a monthly game supplement rather than a magazine. It was just chock full of hard game info, consisting of input from various players and fans, stuff from Gary, etc. And I just cranked that out on my Macintosh, took it down to the Kinko's for duplication, and mailed it out to everybody. They're pretty collectible these days. But like I say, it's unfortunately, I feel in retrospect, being able to look back and seeing so much done by so many talented authors and so many companies and so many genres. I mean, role-playing is everywhere. It's everything. But looking at all this, I have to look back and look at Dangerous Journeys as Gary's biggest oops. Going, yeah, people want more rules and more details and more complexity because you're going to play this game as a hobby in all your spare time or something. I don't know what he was thinking. But anyhow, he certainly had enough greatest hits, and we can certainly forgive the man an oops or two.
Oh, yeah.
I would say so. I mean, just when you look back on everything that has happened, you know, everyone's still celebrating the accomplishments, and I honestly think there's way more old school players and DMs out there than there's ever been. You know, since they switched to third edition. You know, I never left. So
I have to grant to everybody that I have a pretty lofty philosophical view of the whole thing. You know, we look at it and say, "Oh, it's just a game,"
right.
But I've been able to enunciate some of the differences in style more clearly and point out that we can play it as a game with rules that we obey and you don't break those rules, etc. Or more as a pastime where, yeah, those are more guidelines. We can roll that, but we can ignore the roll. Or we want to do this, but somebody else comes up with an idea. So let's change the whole adventure into something that was a player idea. That makes it precious. That makes it not just the game master's ideas, but those of the players as well. And it makes it your joint experience, your joint game. But from the lofty philosophical point of view, just to indulge me just for a bit.
No, we'd love to hear it.
Please.
In the last 30 or 40,000 years, every pastime man has invented has been tied closely, pardon the dog, tied closely to our genetic heritage of competition. Competition is how we managed to survive as cavemen. We managed to survive and dominate the animals, and now practically run, or think we run, the entire earth. This instinct to compete is just baked into us, and every game, start with chess, go all the way on up to Olympic sports, other team sports events. You name it, and there's a winner and a loser, or a winning and a losing team. And for the first time, we all played around with role playing as a childhood thing. Cops and robbers, whatever name you gave to it, ethnic slurs involved or not, that was common, 50, 60 years ago when I was a kid. But in all of these things, there's always this competition, and for the first time, these two blah, middle-aged white guys with no successful backgrounds managed to put together and publish rules or guidelines for what they didn't even realize at the time. Rules for medieval war game. Okay, fine. But what is hiding in there and what has evolved from that par excellence, just amazing evolutionary tree from this beginning. They came up with a game where everybody wins and nobody loses.
Yep.
And all the losers, all the monsters, are imaginary. Everybody who is at the table is a winner, and even if their character gets damaged or even killed, you can always start another one. You have gained thereby from the personal experience, and your character didn't do so well, but fine. It's a game or a pastime. You just make another one, continue on. Now, I see this as a reach towards the better part of ourselves, transcending, surmounting this need to compete, the need to destroy, dominate. Now, of course, in the early days with Gary Gygax developing this game in his head and trying it out on the local teenagers, they're trying to win and trying to get over on him, and whatever he says, they're trying to figure out a way around it, and they'll do this and that. So it, in the beginning, was a direct competition between Gary trying to deal with everything these crazy teens were throwing at him, and them trying to deal with all these ideas from the brilliant Gary Gygax. That DM versus player competition heritage, I think we have mostly surmounted, although it still lingers, in many places, and it lingers in certain rules and certain approaches to the game. But we are transcending that and realizing in time that first this idea of role-playing and joint cooperation transcending this need to conquer and destroy and all of that, letting loose a little bit of steam by killing a few dragons or things like that, but nevertheless transcending this worst within us, becoming a cooperative team and thereby achieving things that we cannot achieve individually.
It's really funny you say that.
End of deep philosophical.
No, we love deep philosophical.
Oh, yeah, this is good.
By the way, Gary,
I think that it might take 50 to 100 years. It's taken 50 years now, but my red box is in the Smithsonian and on a postage stamp.
Yes.
Who knows what can happen? But I think this will sink in eventually to the heavy thinkers out there and say, he's got a point. We are reaching towards the better part of ourselves, just like religion gives us a way to reach towards the greater and better sides. And I think role-playing as a category will be known for this. And this era will be marked as a watershed, really, in human philosophy, pastimes, experience. But certainly we now have a choice of virtually any genre, topic, science fiction, fantasy, gumshoes, whatever. And almost every role-playing game gets tweaked to be the way you like it. So this is the ultimate customizable, cooperative, positive experience. And I think it's going to be around for centuries. It's really...
You said some really poignant things, is because when we had Jim Ward on like 4 or 5 times before he passed, and Jim always told us the story about how he killed Mordenkainen like 6 times in Starship Warden, and that's how the term Monty Hall DM came about, because Gary called him a Monty Hall DM for keeping on killing him. So I go back. I've had 2 TPKs in 45 years of my campaign. That's it.
Yeah, I don't have them very much at all, and. There have been plenty of game sessions I've run that we haven't rolled the dice at all.
Cool.
In my campaign games. I ran an online chat room game. Started it on America Online back in 1992. I was working for them as remote paid staff, part of the online gaming forums, OGF. And it started there in a chat room. We outlived AOL chat rooms, moved to, I think, 3 other chat rooms along the way across the next 29 years, including 3 of the same players through most of that time. And I have chat logs for most of it. So now we're looking at what do we do with this very strange, I mean, imagine your home game and how boring it is about half the time, talking about snacks and the latest politics or whatever. So this would all have to be shook down into something readable and all the extra chaff removed and left in a master treatise available for serious weirdos who really want to read through the whole thing. But we can certainly extract the dozens of interesting plot lines and epic adventures that we had along the way and boil that down. So maybe watch for that within the next couple of years. We'll see.
That's cool.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about with that too, Frank, because I live stream my games, but I don't live stream a theatrical presentation unless it's special people. My Thursday night games is I am streaming my guys playing, and we go off on topics. We talk about we're right in the middle of the game. We're like start talking about music or the Eagles. It's just and that's it's a bonding session with your friends.
Well, I'll toss in another thoughtful point. We game on 4 different levels in our brains. We interact as characters, okay, first. Then we interact as gamers, rolling the dice, this and that. Then we interact as friends, chatting about this and that in our lives. And then we also interact and ring in bits and pieces from the metaverse. Like, for example, you might toss in an Indiana Jones quote or Star Wars or something like that just to illustrate a point or just because it's the flow of the game or something. All 4 of these levels, we go shifting back and forth between all of them effortlessly. And it's amazing what role-playing can do for us, opening things up.
You know how many Caddyshack or Fletch or Animal House quotes I put into into a game for absolutely. By the way, everyone, the giveaways tonight is winner will get the brand new World of Greyhawk Gazetteer redone for 5th edition, and Treasures of Greyhawk, the old school 2nd edition. If you already have 1 or 2 of these, I will swap them out for something you have. All right, so they're in reprints. Wow, we got a lot of people on now. We had 2 massive raids come in, Frank. So we had Gary Con Live, and we had Art of Mike Disney. So we got. So I'd like to ask you this. You and I are from the same area, from the Philadelphia metropolitan area, and we talked about that when you were at Page. But the timeline here is you got invited in 1980 to move to Lake Geneva, and was it before or after the tournament that you won?
I was an unemployed bum in Lake Geneva. I got out of college and went back to that area. I was a musician during college and actually toured the national park system for a couple of summers playing sing-alongs and stuff. In conjunction with that and my Park Service connection through my dad, they actually had me come to a folk music concert at the White House one year for the Nixons and a bunch of the Cabinet and about 1,000 inner city kids. That was a lot of fun. But then after basically wasting most of the 70s, especially once we discovered this new D&D game, at one point we were playing about 4 nights a week, plus all weekend. The weekend marathons, we'd get together Friday night and keep going until Sunday night, and everybody would go back and apologize to their wives or husbands, and so forth. We've realized in retrospect that this game back starting 76, 77 had 2 female players, 1 black guy, and a rotation of others featuring virtually every ethnicity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And this illustrates the lie behind, frankly, straight up the lie between what some say, not to say Hasbro specifically, but what some say was a time when we were all bigoted and biased, and it was wrong then, it was wrong now, comments like that relating to our work and our gaming and so forth. And I would offer an obscenity at this point, but I don't do that. My gaming group, and 2 of whom came to Page and joined me, Aileen, my former girlfriend, and Everett, my first black player, we got together and they were swamped. They did autographs, they were there for photos, etc. And all this illustrates the diversity and the appreciation of individuals has been there from the very roots of the game. It just depends on what group you look at, I guess, to see whether there's bad or good.
It's a matter of outside perspective too, right? You know, it just everyone has their own preconceived notions on things. And that's the shame of it. But like we were always,
and their job is to try and make themselves look wonderful and the only game in town and so forth. And so that's what they try and do. And okay, fine. Now, I know some of the designers at Wizards, and they're good guys. These are good people, basically. It's the business folks that push things in the directions that causes some of us gamers to raise eyebrows, you know?
I got a major announcement. Let me do this real quick here. So everyone's going to stay. I guarantee it. So Lee Savage Baron, I'm sorry, Lee, I'm going to shout you out here, has a spare... look, I got to switch. Here's Anna. It's killing me. It's killing me. Let me switch the setting desktop to the proper one. Lee has a spare. Whoops. Let me go back. Red box. He is going to give it away tonight in addition.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah. All right. So everyone probably want to get in on this, especially if you don't have one. So thank you, Lee. It'll probably be shipped out in March, or if you're at GaryCon, he could probably give it to you at GaryCon if you happen to go. As I know Lee will be there. But like, all right. So that'll be the first prize. The second prize. Yeah, there go all the. Now everyone's going to be jumping in on that. So Lee, thank you so very much. It's really kind of you. So just wanted to put that.
Lee. I'll mention briefly that I do autographs all the time for folks. There's never any charge. I'm just an old schooler. I'm not like William Shatner or somebody charging me for something. But these folks managed to catch me, I think it was a year ago at a con, and I happened to have all my fancy colored pens, gold, silver, and all that. And they got me to autograph, I think it was all 5 of my box sets. Well, they just had a big auction and sold them off, and the red box alone went for over $400 with my big signature on the front. So,
yeah, absolutely. They're very
part of the reason why is it had the vintage dice, and there's a huge dice collector movement going these days. But part of the other reason was that we used such awful boxes back then. It was the cheapest possible fold-up box that they could find to minimize the costs, and thus boxes that have survived have become more and more valuable. You can actually get $20 to $50 for an empty box if it's in really great shape. It's crazy.
Frank, did you check out? And it's the second year in a row. All the crazy. I call them crazies lovingly. The dice collectors that were at Page, and how they know down to the what edition of your box set that each dice set came out. The orange ones and the white.
I know several of them, and I sort of piled up an awful lot of dice while I was at TSR. Sometimes when they were throwing things away. And I would get leftover dribbles of some of the test runs and things like that. So I've successfully sold off little groups of that here and there to some of these guys. So yeah, I know what they're into. It's become a little sub-hobby all in itself.
Excellent. All right, so back to, you're in TSR, you're in Lake Geneva, and is it Gen Con that the tournament is?
Well, I was an unemployed bum, and I applied for a job, but Tom Moldvay had the designer job nailed because the head of design at TSR at that time was Lawrence Schick, and he was from Ohio and had played in this campaign with Tom Moldvay, so he knew the kind of imagination that was available, and they really wanted him for the designer. So they kind of snuck me in the editor slot that had been approved by finance and management. Even though they had focused really on my designs. So I joined TSR and tried to learn the basics of editing and this and that. Unfortunately, one of my first jobs, just a couple months in, Gary Gygax had written a new adventure, Keep on the Borderlands, to replace Mike Carr's In Search of the Unknown. And part of the reason why was Tom Moldvay's new basic set. And frankly, Gary needed the money. He had extended himself so much in the 70s and had never really gotten a payback. And at this point, TSR had grown up to like 100 plus people. So it was, okay, we got to start taking care of Gary here, folks. So he wrote Keep on the Borderlands, kind of knocked it out really quick. You'll notice that nobody in there has a name. I mean, that's how fast he knocked it out. He didn't even take the trouble to go through and really seriously populate it. It's all just, cartoon rolls or cutouts, if you will. But he zapped that out, and it came over, and they landed on my desk, and I was, oh my God, oh my God, I gotta edit a Gygax. And they said, no, you don't. You need to proofread a Gygax. Nobody changes anything that Gary wrote. You know, it took me that. And I read through it, and it suddenly hit me that there was he had 2 clerics in the keep and no chapel. They have no place to work. They have no place of business. What the heck? And I figured, okay, Gary must have been in a hurry, and so he must have just missed it. I mean, and so I brought it up to my bosses, and they said, look, what didn't you understand here? You just proofread. You don't mess with this, you know. But I stuck my neck out, and I've used this story when I've talked to younger kids very often. I went ahead and did my best to imitate Gary's writing and wrote up a chapel for the keep, something, not a big cathedral or anything, just something small and appropriate. And everybody thought I was going to get axed because nobody corrected Gary at that point. It was you go with the flow. Wow. He's the one who makes the money run and the head of the company and all that. And lo and behold, it comes back with his scribble on it, which later became so familiar to me that, yep, looks good. I just forgot one. Use it. And it was the use it phrase that had everybody go, what? Gary never told anybody, yeah, go ahead and write something and put it into my product. This had just never been done, just never. And then later, when I finally had my first face-to-face with Gary as a new employee, one of the things he brought up was, so you're the one. But as a story for younger kids, I point out, okay, I found a problem, I offered a solution, and that's how you fix things. That's how you make things happen. Now, your solution might get shot down, but anybody can sit around and criticize. You'll see and hear that all the time, kids. Try and be a constructive, positive influence, and you'll go somewhere in life. And they've taken this to heart a lot of times.
That's amazing. So it's inside the keep, that chapel inside the keep?
Yep. That's
wow.
Verbatim, pretty much. Yep.
That is fantastic. So the first major project, I'm just trying to timeline it here.
Well, there was a lot going on. I almost got fired for screwing up a couple of editing jobs as I was learning the trick. But then they decided to throw this DM Invitational, and they invited Errol Otis and Len Kafka and Lawrence, of course, Lawrence Schick and Harold Johnson, all these stellar names of Jim Ward was one of the game masters.
Leonard.
He was just so good. But it was Brian Bloom and Gary Gygax, the 2 founders of TSR, plus Jim Ward, and they plopped you down in a chair in an office, and you had to run a game for these 3. And they would try and pull everything in the book, would try and cheat, claim that they had more than what they had on their sheet, you know, all the usual player tricks, as well as scrutinizing each person as to how smoothly the game ran, whether they liked the plot, you know, and the characterizations, you know, all the different elements. The runner-up was a guy named Bob Blake, sadly forgotten nearly in the long run, but he had run the AD&D Open at Gen Con for several years, writing a good bit of it, had been published by Judges Guild, just a very well-known name at the time. I beat him by 1 point, according to Jim Ward, and took the Game Masters Invitational. They gave me awards at Gen Con and so forth, and suddenly everybody was looking around going, who the heck is this Philadelphia guy, comes in out of nowhere and suddenly steals the baby? You know, all of a sudden he's the top guy for Dungeons and Dragons. Well, I wasn't then. I was simply the award-winning game master. But 3 years after that, Gary put out a memo to everybody after we had worked together and a lot of things had changed. He told everybody, I'm busy with business. Anything D&D and AD&D, call Frank. Period. So I was like the god of that whole thing for about 2-3 years there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was all very strange. But then Gary was overthrown, you might say, and I did not get along with the Pog. I generally don't refer to her by name. The person who ousted Gygax. Yeah. So the Pog and I didn't get along. I didn't like some of the personality traits, for one thing. And finally, she threatened to send me back to the writer's pool, as it were. Get a cubicle and line up with all the rest of the nice, meek writers and obeying instructions and stop being Frank Mentzer. So, no, I left rather than do that. I was one of the only people to walk out on them. at that point. Everybody was clinging to their jobs desperately.
Yeah, except for Jim. Didn't
Gary
Jim
asked
quit?
me to hold on.
Didn't Jim
Yeah.
Ward quit like twice?
Sorry?
Didn't Jim Ward
Yeah,
quit
something like
twice?
that.
Yeah.
But then he ended up in charge of their whole production
Right.
thing.
Yeah, he told us the story. Yeah.
Yeah, he quit, as I heard it, when they wanted him to fire all the crucial creative
Yeah.
talent. And he just
Yep.
said, no, forget it. It's not worth this.
Yep.
But
Yeah, I joined Gary. Unfortunately, we were both underfunded, and we were also ground zero target for the POG, who just threw
Yeah.
money at us, legal things and this and that, until we just ran out of all of our funding and destroyed Gary in the process. It was
a
sad
shame.
to see the effects of that on him.
But between 1981 and 1985, it's legend, right? Like, you started out editor of Polyhedron and like the main person for RPGA, right?
Actually, January 1980 is when I started. Okay. And then after winning the DM competition, they gave me one last public audition, you might say. Will Niebling, who was head of sales at the time, very well-known figure behind the scenes throughout many years of gaming, worked for Mayfair, for example, helped make them famous, etc. Anyhow, Will was our head of sales, and so they had him drag me down to Charleston, South Carolina, where the Jerry Lewis Telethon was covering, amongst many other things for the telethon, a local D&D game being played by a bunch of sailors on leave, raising money for charity. And so I sat in there and DM'd for about half an hour on film, etc. But then they interviewed me, and it happened to go network for the Lewis Telethon. And I apparently presented a reasonable explanation of this game that people had thought, wait a minute, weird, say who knows what, and convinced everybody that it's just like a normal board game. Yeah, here, see, look at the people sitting here, and playing. And kept my composure under national feed cameras and everything. So at that point, they decided, okay, Frank at least can keep his composure, and they asked me to build an organization that Mike Carr, the general manager, had proposed in writing. I've got all the memos and things. This role-playing game association. They had named it and everything. Yep. I ran a contest to name the Polyhedron, the newsletter, to get the name for that. But in general, I took Mike Carr's notes and then developed it further. What I did that they were a little iffy about was I tried to appeal to all role players. I wanted Call of Cthulhu players, Paranoia, you name it. I wanted everybody on board so that we could all connect and find other players and the whole thing. But unfortunately, not Gary, but the Blooms and other management types won out. They felt that by promoting other people's games, we were promoting other companies and things and just cutting our own throats, business-wise. Okay. Whereas my point was, are you insane? People will pay us to join the RPGA so that they can play other people's games. You've got
and you get the address. Yeah, you get the information of every game player. You get their. Yeah.
So what, Brian? What is the late Brian Bloom was yelling at him at one point? What is your problem with getting free money from people, whatever games they play, to join our organization, and then they're hooked on our organization? These games, the networks, the tournaments, we run everything. This is nothing but win for us. And he was, no, we refuse to promote other people's games. So that was that.
Oh,
that's a new story. We never heard that story before. That's brand new.
Gary and Brian, who started TSR, were never very good businessmen, and so they were apples ripe for the plucking when a good, ruthless businesswoman came in, sized up the situation, bought the Blooms out, retired Gary, and simply took things over. In the course of the next 5 years, since she acquired 100% of the stock, it's essentially her plaything, okay, legally and under Wisconsin law and everything else. Since she owned 100.0% of TSR, she could do whatever the heck she wanted with it. And she managed to funnel a lot of its cash assets, shall we say, to her company, the Dilly Estate with Buck Rogers and things like that. And essentially left TSR by 99 a stripped down company with no physical assets to speak of, nothing left but copyrights and artwork. And that was enough, luckily, to attract the great, noble Peter Atkinson, who was, I started to know him when he was a middle management, pudgy little guy at Boeing, but he had dreams. And he put his money and all his energy behind this troop of people he had found, headed by Lisa Stevens, former RPGA member, known from way back. And built this new company, Wizards. There was going to be a role-playing company, but then his friend Rich Garfield came up with Magic the Gathering and everything changed, etc. But he stepped in thanks to the card game money, saved the shell of TSR, and kept D&D going. Now, at that point, we had a major shift, obviously, in the design. We point out to folks you can play any D&D written up until 99, and it's all compatible. You can mash it up. It's all cross-compatible. All the mechanics are the same. Anything from the year 2000 on, from 3rd edition on, is different. So it doesn't mash up nearly as easily. But I admire them so much. They tackled 3rd edition, and they wanted to go these new directions and try new approaches to design. And of course, they screwed up a lot of things. They tried to listen to the fans, etc., but it took a couple of years there for this to shake out and evolve into 3.5, which is so fine-tuned people still play it to this day. You know, it rocks right along. But then, I got to put in another thumbs up. 5th edition stripped things down and made things easier to learn, faster to play, got rid of a lot of the cumbersome rules that were still attached to 3.5, I think. So kudos and thumbs up to the designers of 5th edition, and I'm eagerly awaiting what more they have to come up with.
Cool.
Not the typical words you hear from an old school gamer.
Well,
because
a lot of people just like what they have been doing all along. I mean,
we tend to gravitate towards a specific system or systems. For me, I have a favorite fantasy, science fiction, and then horror systems. All three. I happen to be fond of Chill from Pace Setter. Years ago. We develop our fondness for the systems. Our favorite system is usually the one we started on, or one shortly after that. You know, it's a common pattern that I see thousands of times over.
So, you do. How long were you the editor for the Polyhedron?
Well, I worked at. I put out the first 4 or 5 issues almost single-handedly. In those days, we had to have typewritten text typeset on a linographic, CompuGraphic typesetting machine, and then physically pasted onto boards. And this is where the term paste up comes from in the production process. All of this is now, of course, done digitally and 100 times faster than the old days. But I felt I wanted to personally get down and inspect every board of each issue to make sure that everything was as perfect as I could get it. And then I would actually physically sign off on the board. So when you see my signature there on that one, it's my signature on the layout board there. But I put out, like I say, the first 4 or 5 of them. We found some excellent people. I started with Bill Hoyer, was my right arm in starting the thing, and they did not tell me at the time that he was legendary himself. He had been a member of the Castle and Crusade Society when all this was first getting started, before D&D, and had been around ever since on the inner circle of virtually everything. But Bill was stuck with all the grunt jobs of the RPGA. I was merrily writing things and interviewing and doing all that, and cribbing old artwork from the original D&D set, etc., anything we could find in the art files. And then we ran across a local gal named Mary Kirchhoff, who took over the editor job. And then at some point it was rolling along. I had written a whole bunch of scenarios for tournaments for them, and I continued that up through until I left TSR. More than a dozen overall. The hidden Mentzers. Some people have fun tracking down these scenarios I've written that never got published. You know, they're lurking out there. But at one point, Gary came to me. I had gotten to know him quite well, interacted, had offered him some good advice here and there, and he liked what he saw. And at some point, he said, "Okay, Frank, we're gonna find somebody else to run this. And I want to pull you to write the new D&D basic set." I said, "What? We just did Moldvay a year ago. I mean, a new basic set." And he explained it, that We had broken into like Sears and the mega chains, and we were going international, and we needed, to be blunt, non-comic art, more mass market book cover style art. Nothing wrong with the comic art that we all grew up on, and I still love it to this day. Jeff D, Errol Lotus, I'll eat it up. But for the mass market, it couldn't be that niche, that hobby, that tiny little corner down there. It had to be more spectacular, more Hollywoodish. And they had found this guy, Larry Elmore, a Kentucky madman driver, hard-living guy.
Elmore right there.
Nice married man, great kids and all that, but they hired him away from government service, actually. He was doing like posters and things for the military. And he got
the other one
better quickly and started knocking at just what has become the absolute icons of this era. The covers for my boxes, the interior art that you're showing the folks watching. There's just nothing like it. I was just the luckiest dog at TSR to get this level of art all over my products. Now, in fairness, when it's come up, the fact that this has lasted 40 years and parents still hand Redbox to their kids, and just, here you go. This is all you need to learn the game. So my writing had something to do with the sales, although I still credit Larry's artwork as the main reason why it went mega. And from the figures I've seen and heard, sold approximately 40 to 50 million copies in 14 languages, even including Russian and Mandarin Chinese. And they didn't warn me of that when I started writing it, but that's the way it ends up. Fate throws crazy stuff at you.
Yeah. What was the design criteria? Meaning, what was the changes to the rules or the approach and stuff? What were the marching orders they gave you more than the art needed to be changed, so to speak?
Although I worked closely with Gary on Redbox, the first one, he pretty much left me alone after that, to their detriment. I got kind of crazy there towards the end with Immortals and things. But I am happy to have pioneered certain things like the complete guide to your D&D campaign, every nut, bolt step along the way that Gary had merely referred to tangentially in the DM guide. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
No, that's great.
I know there was a couple things, like I know there's a thief difference between Moldvay and
that's
Beck
right.
Me.
All right. You asked about the criteria. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry.
No. This is good.
It's all good.
I think I'm still doing okay at 74. Just
you're doing fantastic
on too many different topics, and
it's great
that way. The main thing we tried to do was address the reading level. And the trickiest part of the writing was to not have it sound like it's talking down to you.
Right.
But nevertheless, to do it in very simple words, deal with very simple concepts, boil it down. Now, at this stage, I was one of the maybe couple of hundred people at this point who had played D&D for more than 5 years. I got started in 76, 77. But from the learning experience of making every mistake in the book, seeing every situation come up in the course of games, I was able to bring all that together and then boil it down like a stew until I had this very fine roué left after you boil it down. Just the minimum necessary to instruct you just the basics of what goes on in the game. And in the course of that, for example, I, through narrative, illustrate a typical shopping trip, picking up new armor or things. And this is the sort of thing people hadn't talked about before. It illustrated more the depth of the game in the role-playing aspect. Again, getting away from the military miniatures and all that sort of thing. But mostly, we went through scientific analyses of the language used, what are called Fogg and Dale indexes, and a couple of others that have evolved since then. But these basically measure lengths of words and lengths of sentences, and boils it down, tells you what reading level, what grade level you're aiming at. I successfully brought down the introductory story, the very first one, not going through the dungeon with Elena and all that, but just the intro, the preface, is readable by a 6-year-old, believe it or not. I had to really trim it down, and yet you read through that and there's nothing that is talking down to you. You know, it excites you. It says, yes, we're going to go have fun and this and that. The whole adventure where I had to kill poor Elena, I had to. Anyhow, all of that grabs you right by the heart and says, now you have a motive to keep playing. It illustrated in just slightly advanced reading level. At that point, we're up to more like 4th to 6th grade, as opposed to a 6-year-old, 6 to 8-year-old. But literally, the preface can be read by somebody that young and get them excited. And then when they get just a little older, they can work through the intro in age 8 to 10, and they know what the game is all about. Then it's from there. The direction I lucked out, when Gary asked me to do basic, I really didn't want to. And I told him that, and everybody else told him that, because the big money was in advanced D&D. They were doing these books, all these supplements, all these modules, huge distribution in North America. And basic was, frankly, at that time looked at as, we have to do this because of the legal agreements with Arneson as a result of 2 different lawsuits. So we have to keep it in print. Under our terms, keeping it in print means supporting it with at least 4, count them, 4 modules. We did that with, I think, the Gangbusters game and a couple others. You know, that was our minimum package. And I had ideas, and I talked to Gary. And he had ideas because he was looking at some of the potential sales figures. And he didn't tell me at that time, mentioned later, that they were going to translate it into all these languages, and this is all going to go global and crazy. But we worked out this method to start everybody. It wasn't much for rules differences, really. I trimmed a lot of stuff out. And in the red box, I offer an awful lot of advice. There's all these advice sections on all these different topics. And you look through that, and it's like really obvious that whoever wrote this has been playing this for years, okay, and it successfully boiled it down. But I just lucked out, really. It all happened to flow so well and become so popular that it just, we got lucky. It was as pretty and glittery as possible with that Elmore art, so that made people pick it up. But thankfully, something I happened to hit on and did it right has made it survive for 40 years. Mm-hmm. What I did introduce and took liberties with is the programmed learning, step learning technique that I put in. As a classic example, the weapon mastery system gives you a reason to use any given weapon. You want something that's best against large things that are riding something, there's a weapon for that, and the weapon mastery system I developed does that. Now, why isn't that in the basic set? Because you can use it right off the bat. Well, because you as players, not the characters, the players are not ready for that yet. And there are various things, just as I introduced the whole campaign and castles and dominions and all that in Companion, I also waited deliberately for later on for some of these more advanced techniques that you can then retrofit into your campaign. You can say, okay, from here on we're using weapon mastery. Okay, fine. We still only have 5th level characters, but fine. But you had to mature as players and learn how to apply this judiciously and in the right contexts and all that. So the whole system, the 5 box sets, well, the first 4 at least, demand a lot of the learning player, etc. But it does really feed you all the steps, step by step. Mm-hmm. Immortals is where I essentially lay out my description of where is all this and why does it all work this way. Having a scientific bent, I postulated that the energy for magic comes from the planar differential. We have planes of existence, okay, fine, if ether, astral, whatever, and unless the planes have the exact same amount of energy, each one, there's going to be a differential in that energy, and thus there's going to be a potential difference, and thus any potential like that can be tapped for the energy, just like they have something floating on the ocean and then something way down that's, so much colder that they can use that temperature differential to generate energy. Well, in the same way, the potential energy differences at the planes are a source of energy, and so I simply postulated, okay, this is where this all comes from, all this energy for magic. And people, whether through mnemonic means or prayer or whatever, they have developed their own personal means of channeling this energy into usable forms, many utilitarian forms, seeing magic, detecting this and that, not just fireballs and lightning bolts, so it's become essentially a foundation of the whole existence, the whole society in this fictional campaign world. So that's my approach to design, very different from a lot of other people, that this all has to be just as logical, as comprehensive, and as integrated, and as stable as what we consider modern science, except this is all based on the 4 elements, my theory of magical power and where it comes from, and then et cetera, and all this weirdness in the D&D Immortals set, including 5-dimensional spaces and just all sorts of living musical notes out there. You run into them in the first module I wrote. Talk to the noble from the Key of C, of course, being the nobles. Things like that, just stretching the imagination.
Mm-hmm. I love it. That's very similar to the way I want to do it too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are the maps in here your campaign setting maps?
In where?
In the box, in the red box.
Oh, no, all the maps and things like that were generated specifically for the red box, in part to illustrate the various mapping tools, the various common things you run into, dead end, trap, the door, this and that, whatever. Yeah, it is all very carefully constructed. Virtually every word, every illustration has a very specific purpose in there. And like I say, we got lucky. It all added up beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, when you brought out the 5th box set, the Immortals one, what was the feedback from the TSR people? I'm just curious.
Well, the atmosphere at that time was that Gary had just been elbowed out.
Okay, it was that late. Okay.
And nobody was keeping an eye on me.
This is 86, yeah. It's 86.
Yeah, 85, really, when I was writing this. So I was a real wild card. They let me get away with this, and they really shouldn't have, because it wasn't going to sell very well as a source book of, an explanation of all eternity, for game masters. And a lot of people couldn't figure out how the heck to play, and that was the problem with the production methodology. We had to commit to sizing, number of items per case, blah, 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 more than a year in advance. When you're at this level of publishing and you're running off, a million copies of something, or at that time at least 10 or 20,000, easy. But you have to have all this nailed down with your distributors and everybody. And thus, when it came time to write Immortals, I ran out of room. There was just too darn much to say and too much to cover. What it needs, and what I am still considering writing with a co-author, is the campaign guide to Immortals.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'll show you how to start one. Start you from square one. What are you? What physically are you? Who are you? Let's go ahead and fill in the details of your past life if you want, but here's what you are now, and here's your objectives. Here's your neighborhood. Here are your neighbors. Here's your job. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you can do. I mean, all of this needs to be laid out. None of this appears in the Immortals set. The Immortals is just all the data of what's there, and who does what, and what big horrible monsters are there that can literally eat planets and things like that.
Wow.
And part of the reason for that exalted scale is that I had gotten tired of listening for more than 5 years to people saying that in their games how they went off and they killed Thor and they had taken over the universe and this and that. It was admittedly a very small percentage of just the loonies out there. I shouldn't say that. Anyhow, the extreme high-level players who could get away with everything because their game masters had no control and no idea how to handle that. And this is all my answer to that. Oh, you think you can win this? Mm-hmm. Okay, and my ultimate answer there was, not only do you have to become an immortal and then make it all the way to the top of the immortal hierarchy, then you have to give it all up, become immortal again, and do that a second time before you've really won D&D. Wow. So I gave him basically an unreachable thing, even for the most extreme giveaway Monty Hall whatevers, So essentially I put an end to the D&D campaign and all that speculating. Oh, it has a beginning and an end now. And the end is so far out there, nobody will ever get to it. So I thought it was fitting.
Wow, that's amazing. I did not know that. Um, yeah, because I always stayed in the AD&D realm. Once
Hmm.
AD&D came out, I never went back to basic. But just I
Well,
never.
I have to mention the work of a guy named Bruce Hurd,
Yeah.
who was just the guy in charge. He had done some design work, but mostly in charge of submissions at TSR and all the drudgery of reading through all this drivel from terrible authors, finding the decent stuff, and then running across the gems now and then. And he took the helm. He had a vision of a world for the D&D basic line, and he
Yeah.
built this world called Mystara with authors like Ed Greenwood and many others. He just brought this stellar talent together, and authors being authors, they will all go whatever direction with their own crazy ideas unless you guide them and you focus them on an objective and a goal. And that's what Bruce did, conveyed his vision of this. And now we have 9, 10, 12 gazetteers covering the elves, the dwarves, the hobbits, these various kingdoms, this and that, and then the maps of everything. It's just one of the most complete world packages I have ever seen, and it's
Yep.
mostly due to this guy who is just
Yep.
some guy in submissions who ended up taking charge and just drove that ship forward. It was great.
Okay.
Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, well, right. So technically, Aldred started in Mystara, correct? Is that one the X series where X is? I was
Yeah,
getting
it was
confused.
actually an idea from Tom Mulvey initially, I think,
Okay.
the name
Okay.
and things like that. And my expert set is really just a revision of the Mulvey expert. I didn't do much new there.
Okay.
Just change the phrasing, and trim the rules a little bit. A couple new monsters, that sort of thing.
Master set in the M modules. Okay. All right. So that's some pretty amazing stuff that I've never heard before. That's
Cool.
fantastic. So,
Cool.
I have to ask this before we go on to your setting and all, and just some of the most unbelievably crazy valued modules of all time. The R series, right? It's nuts. It's insane how valuable those are now.
Mhm.
But I saw this on your Facebook, and when I was a kid, I run Hamlet. I'm like, oh my gosh, Temple's going to be out shortly. 6 years
Mhm.
later, right?
Mhm.
So you put this up here. It's from Gary to Dave Sutherland about he's got to wait about a week to start. This is in 1982, right? To start Temple. So
And they had Gary had gotten tied up and couldn't finish the GD series, and so Dave Sutherland stepped in and wrote most of
okay.
the Q module,
I,
the Demon Web Pits. So hence he's in the loop here on possible design options, etc. And also at that point, Dave was in charge of artwork, so he needed to figure out time slots for artists and illustration and mapping, and all that stuff. So unfortunately, Gary got tied up with other matters, and yeah, it took years. At one point, I was sitting in my office working away at something on the expert or companion set or something. And they had given me an executive office, which the real executives did not really appreciate. But Gary, having limited time between meetings and things, really needed to have me close by to consult with on various design things. And as I point out, eventually I became the top guy for D&D, AD&D, as a result of all this. But I had to be nearby Gary so that when he had 5 minutes, I could squeeze in. And so I had an office right there with the head of production, the finance guy, legal, all these executives who deserved executive offices and executive secretaries. I turned down the secretary. No, I just hide in my office and I write. That's all I do. But I was able to scoot on over, and he would drop in occasionally as well. And I was busy typing away. And door opens, and I don't notice who's coming in because I'm busy writing at the time. And I glance up, and it's Gary. And he just says something like "Rah," unintelligible, and drops this box, which is a Moldvay, or actually Cook Marsh expert set, beat up old box, and obviously full of something. And I didn't even have a chance to say anything to him, and I finished whatever I was writing. And then picked up the box and opened it and looked at it, and lo and behold, it's Gary's original typewritten manuscript for Temple. or at least the first half of it, with notes and copies of his maps for the rest, etc. Gary never let his hand-drawn color maps, he used color pencil and things, he never let those out of his possession. He would have his secretary do color photocopies and then give those to people he was working with, on various projects. But I did somehow end up with the manuscript for Temple. Showed up in my files years later. So I took the opportunity, I think it was in 2004, at a game convention in Lake Geneva, to bring that back and present it, the return of the Temple of Elemental Evil, returned the manuscript to Gary, the original owner and creator, etc. Afterwards, some collectors just looked at me very funny, like I was insane. You know how many tens of thousands of dollars that was worth, the original? Well, it was Gary's, and damn well ought to go back to Gary.
Wow.
So when was Temple of Elemental Evil initially concepted? Is it something very, very early on?
Yes. It was actually a war game scenario played using the chainmail rules, and this has been recreated by a guy named Paul Stormberg, who goes to Gary Kahn and others, who's invested huge amounts of money on his own, reproducing this layout, etc. But you can see the roots of the game are illustrated through this Temple module, from the first wargaming things, and then the Moat House and the Hamlet scenario, which introduces you to a town and interactions and things like that, and then Rumors of this Temple, which then takes you through all the adventuring and monsters and all this, and it's the first mega campaign, and has been very popular to date. I still wish I had provided a little more organization at the time. Knowing what I learned later, I would have written explicit guidelines for various factions, tribes, groups, even on different levels of the dungeon, to work together against this invader, these invaders. People just show up and kill everything they see. Adventurers, of course, they're totally indiscriminate. They just want to go in and wipe everything out. So I would think that the tribes should band together and develop their defenses. The only time I mentioned that to Gary, he said, "You'll shred them. These people don't know strategy and tactics. No, we can't do that. Then they'll hate the thing. They'll all die." So we left it a little easier.
So with this, it has Gary Gygax with Frank Mentzer. What of this did you write or edit or make changes to? Because obviously Gary trusted you at this point.
At that point he trusted me utterly. I would take him to Walmart on occasion, because he didn't drive. His eyesight was so bad.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Few people know about that either. He had about a third to half of it completely written, in fairness, and rough notes on a lot of the rest, and all the maps for the whole thing. When it hit my desk, I thought about it and had an epiphany, which turned out just wonderful. Instead of sending the manuscript over to our data entry department, which is the standard, any manuscript, then they save a lot of the grunt work, and they get all the words in. We had a fairly new mainframe computer with a fairly new word processing program. At this point, Microsoft Word 1 had not yet come out. Okay, this was before stuff like that. And I thought about it and had this epiphany, and I told him, no, I'm going to make time in my schedule. And I handled the data entry, input, everything Gary had written. Now, Hamlet was already there. Somebody had already put that in, so at least there was that. But I still tweaked a little bit of Hamlet, not much. You'll see almost no changes. But everything Gary had written, I would then change little bits along the way. Phrasing, whatever, because he trusted me to do this at this point, and I knew better than to change the inimicably glorious Gygaxian prose that pops up, regularly. So I combined the smoothness of a writing style I had learned at that point across 2-3 years with Gary's ideas and et cetera, and as a result, I input everything he had written and then just making changes as I went, and then just kept going. I was on a roll. I was on high Gygaxian cloud, and we just chugged right along. And to this day, very few notice this unless they're other authors. But if you read through Temple, you see absolutely no break in style anywhere. It's as if one person wrote the whole thing.
Yep.
And that's because of what I did, gently massaging Gary's words to combine my feel, style, whatever, and then continuing mostly high Gygaxian with a little bit of Mentzer accent, seasoning here and there, and so it ended up fairly well. I wish I had more. I had a lot more notes on the nodes at the end, but that ended up having to be cut because, again, the business people had decided it was going to be this big and no bigger,
Yeah.
and so we
Well,
just
that's the problem about publishing. You have the constraints, meaning so many words, so big illustrations, and all that. Yeah.
And one of the joys of small publishing, folks like me who've operated out of your basement or whatever, and thanks to the miracles of modern technology, you can get stuff out there on drive-through and whatever. Just follow their rules carefully, and it can get tricky. Personally, I do still lay out the extra bucks for the Adobe package, InDesign, Photoshop, and the whole thing. I've been using it for years. I get better results with that, and it's publishable, quality, what I put out. So that's the way I go.
Yeah, a couple of observations because this is my top adventure of all time. That for me, it's on my wall of fame. And Null, it seems like Null was rushed too because I guess due to space. That's what I figured. That's So I'm going to ask it, everyone. I'm going to ask it, and don't get mad at me. So, in the third level of the temple, Thrommel is interred there.
Right? Here it comes.
Here it comes, right? And he's disguised. It's an illusion of him being a vampire. Was that Gary or was that you?
That's Gary. Okay. That was in his initial notes.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, that's great to know. So there you go, everyone.
Classic Gary to the jaw sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a great. And it's a great. That set our campaign up for years to come because they freed from Thrommel and became King of Threeundy, and so and
convoluted plots were natural to Gary, and there are things in Temple that are actually incorrect. Especially, you're wondering, wait a minute, Loth, Zugmoy, what?
Right.
What demonesses are involved here or what? Part of this is misdirection because of all these convoluted plots and things going on in the Greyhawk campaign. So there's some deliberate false information in there. I won't say which.
Lareth the Beautiful, his allegiance and stuff. and
things like that, yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Interesting.
Indeed.
Well, that's good to know. Really good
it's
to know.
Gygaxian through and through. I was just glad that I was able to retain that Gygaxian flavor through and through, despite my additions, changes, and extrapolation of his notes.
I think this finally came out in 1985, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, roughly. Right.
85, yep. And just, 85. All right. So
40 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been 40 years.
I know.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But it was a mainstay of our setting. So let's go to the most legendary of yours, and I don't have them in hard print except for Egg of the Phoenix, which I want to hear that story because that is years after you left, and that is the tournament series, right? The Age of Falx, these RPGAs. You have these, you can retire, by the way.
Yeah, practically.
Yeah.
Although the real retirement fund would have been in the late 90s when Peter Atkinson got a hold of me and he was raising money for this new card game he wanted to publish.
Oh, the original.
And at one point, if I had the cash, I could have bought entire cases of Magic Alphas. And one case of Magic Alphas in the shrink would currently buy you, probably a $500,000 house. No,
I got
close to that.
I got one Mox and original Mox and a full set of Antiquities, which is like the third. But I don't have the originals. So, we started playing.
When Gary asked me to start this RPGA, which, as I say, had been named by Mike Carr, etc., and I wanted to do things to attract members, of course, and that meant exclusive stuff for members only. We figured, so I got to work writing tournaments, which we could then use at conventions and then sell later. Also dug up a bunch of things like belt buckles and pins and a bunch of other stuff, which has all become crazy collectible here over the years. But at that time, I am proud to mention that I was a dyed-in-the-wool, die-hard company man, totally loyal to Gary. Yep. And I never kept any of this stuff that I was having made to make other people just chortle with glee years down the road when it became insanely collectible. I had kind of could tell that eventually, if this whole thing worked, but I knew role-playing was really transcended this breakthrough in pastimes, in entertainment, and that truth would out. So I put my money on the wheel. You know, we went with this, and everybody who believed in me and my visions and TSRs and the RPGA as a club bought into the pre-publication versions, then the early modules, things like that. And I know one guy, an old military friend, who collected, I think, a full 10 or 12 of my tournaments, all in the pre-publication version. And just one of those these days can go for close to $10,000. It's crazy, because this was so near the birth of now what we have millions of people playing this game in 5th edition, you know, all over the world and all over the country. And who knew it was going to go this far? So we're looking back at the roots and some of the first adventures in tournaments and in the 70s and 80s things. So this has all become just crazy collectible. All 4 of these, R1 through 4,
Yep.
were tournaments that I wrote for the RPGA. R1 was my first one, is sort of my answer to Gary's Tomb of Horrors, because
It's
as
tough.
you go through that, you can logically figure things out and figure out solutions, whereas a lot of Tomb of Horrors I felt was, who knows what's going to happen? You know, it's just crazy ideas coming in from nowhere with no clues. I give you enough clues, at least, that you can work your way through it, and it's tricky.
That cover, though, that cover shows one of the most difficult fights because they're pouring oil. You know,
Right.
It's rough.
I lure you into this
Yeah.
room where there is literally an entire thieves guild up atop this wall in a trap they have built right next to a troll lair. You know, so if you wander in here, you get hit from both sides, and it's just a nightmare. Yeah. So you can make it through this module, just as you can make it through Tomb of Horrors, but I think it's easier to make it through this, especially if you're a thinking player. The second one I wrote was something I knocked out quick in like 3 days for the DM competition in 1980, where I was running a game for Brian Bloom, Jim Ward, and Gary Gygax. And I decided to jump in with both feet. I decided to tackle a topic that everybody was scared to death to go near: illusions, illusionists.
Yeah.
So this is my answer to how you run a high-level illusionist, the sort of stuff he'll pull on you, how you run, lots of advice for game masters all through there. And as you know, that I ended up winning that competition in part on the basis of the quality of the scenario, as well as my skills as running the DM. After that, I should say Heidel was totally fabricated out of nothing for this tournament. Whereas R1, Falks, I got some ideas from my home campaign, and also I used some characters from my home campaign. In R3, and then its sequel R4, Egg of the Phoenix and Doc's Island, in Egg of the Phoenix, I used various characters from my Philadelphia campaign, so they were all delighted, all the old players, to see that. But I stole the concept freely from Robert Heinlein's Glory Road, where which is starts fantasy and then goes science fiction on you. Classic Heinlein, beautiful job. But they have this thing called an Egg of the Phoenix, which is apparently a fold box containing a computer or all this knowledge or something in his science fiction context. So I decided to just steal the concept but make it a fantasy gadget. You never really use or need the egg. All you have to do is rescue it here in the course of the adventure. But we actually played out most of this in the campaign in Philadelphia in 77 to 79.
Wow.
I condensed a lot of it down for this and abbreviated parts of it, such as the initial caves dungeon. It's actually like 10 times that size, and some folks have seen the original maps for that and so forth. I like to take the originals to conventions and do show and tell and blow people away comparing it to the published version. But in Egg of the Phoenix, you end up hopefully succeeding. You rescue the egg from the bad guys, and then in the sequel, Doc's Island, you take it to this super good guy, to this island he has and turn it over. You don't want to be messing with an artifact like this. And as a reward, he points out that there's some very nasty things way down deep in this dungeon under this old castle, including demons and all sorts of stuff. But he has it good word that there's a holy sword down there, and you happen to have a paladin in your party. So if you feel like something to do, and thus Doc's Island is just this multi-level dungeon. It's a little weird in that you take the elevator down to level 6 and start from there working your way down, because this is just for, serious heavy adventuring.
Where is it? And I'm sorry because it's been a while since I played the Egg of the Phoenix. I didn't play these. I played the actual venture that came out. That was all together.
Sure.
You go back and you're in the dinosaur era. You're actually going back in time, and that's that big, deep ravine. It's like almost like a tunnel, right? Up and down. I don't know if that's R3 or R4.
Right, that's in R3.
It's R3, yeah, okay.
At the top of this extinct volcano.
Right, okay.
Lost world thing. There's even a demon that you piss off who comes up out of the remains of the volcano, and you got to deal with that.
Yeah.
All sorts of things. But there's a planar gate up top there that takes you off to the negative plane of existence where they've hidden the egg, and it's. Oh, spoiler! Sorry, I just.
That's okay. Right, but you can so. These are like I said, especially in pristine condition, even if they're signed. Or I saw one in shrink the other day. I was like, "What? How's that possible? I didn't know they were in shrink wrapped."
Well, the first 3 were shrink wrapped. R4 that on screen was never shrink wrapped.
Wow.
Right.
So you get to a point where you have this. Now this came out in 1989. You were gone 3 years. How did the compile? And whose idea was it to compile them and put them out as a published adventure?
Well, it was actually somebody in the design department, and I would not be surprised if it turned out to have been the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Bruce Hurd.
Okay.
But somebody looked at the stuff that I had produced, the fact that a lot of them had just simply been thrown away, pulped by the new management,
Oh my gosh.
and not even sold, and said, we ought to do something. We could make more money off of this. And so they contacted Paul Jaquays at that time and had him overlay a plot to tie the 4 modules together. Now, as I say, the first one was a Tomb of Horrors type standalone. The second was part of a competition, and it was only 3 and 4 that were constituted the actual Egg of the Phoenix epic adventure. Paul overlaid this with a storyline, etc., that I didn't really care for, in part because I was the original author and I had my original visions. But it's not a bad job, certainly, and it's very playable, and it still is quite epic, which is the feel I tried to present.
Absolutely.
In the core of it.
Yeah,
and you can extrapolate from it as well with some of the stuff in there and open up just whole worlds and additional adventures tacked.
Well, there's an Imperia map in here.
Sorry?
There's an Imperia map in here, if I
yeah,
recall.
Imperia, my campaign, is mentioned in there, right.
Just to show you there, Frank, look, right there's my wall of fame. I got 24 published adventures up on here already, and there's Egg of the Phoenix, there's Temple, so, yeah.
The bed bug hiding under the pillow is that in R4, the standalone, I wrote an extensive preface in Doc's Island explaining how all this came to be with the egg and all that noise, and described a situation where this continent is east of Greyhawk across the Solnor Ocean, thousands of miles away, but on the same planet. And Gary thought about that for a while, and I still have the memo he sent back, and I still handwritten on it, approving this, as long as it's distant, does not have a lot of interaction with Greyhawk, very rare, but okay, approved. So according to the creator, the original author, Doc's Island and all this, and my continent of Aquaria, and the backstory that is contained in R4,
here we go.
Doc's Island, describes how this is connected to Greyhawk, this campaign here, this continent, with Gary's approval. Now, the current owners of the intellectual property, etc., do not agree with this. So we cannot say this in print. We cannot make these claims in print. But this is the will and intentions of Gary and Frank here along the way. Very little contact between the two, but this being on the same planet, East Greyhawk. essentially.
So Anna, we can discuss that. So I ran it in Greyhawk. So I ran it in Greyhawk all those years ago.
So I have this approval in writing, but
Really?
current administration and owners do not acknowledge this. So, oh well. We are looking at exploring ways to publish this nevertheless and merely file off the serial numbers and not mention Greyhawk and things like that. Because in these days of the internet, the truth will out and everybody will know, oh yeah, that's actually Greyhawk. Look, he can even prove it. He's got the memo there on his webpage, that sort of thing.
Wow. I did not. That is.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. There are a lot of unusual aspects to this, but it's basically an entire campaign, an entire content. There's a technological area which is actually a violation of the rules. A scientific modern society is finally coming back to visit this planet, which has been overrun by these magic people who have tapped some new energy source. So the technical folks are real interested. Okay, how can we use this? What can we do? But there is, similar to the good old Star Trek Enterprise, a non-interference rule. So they come sneaking in and do a little smuggling on the side. And this is a way you can tie in a science fiction theme into your fantasy campaign if you want. Well, or you can just relegate them to the sides and not go there.
You had Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and you had the Egg of Coot and Blackmore, all that in the Greyhawk as it was, right? So
Can you zoom in on the lake area in the upper right on there?
Up here?
I'll show you a little something.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, one of the immortals got stuck here. He was researching, and you know how librarians and researchers are. You get lost in your work and your thoughts. And they were evacuating all the immortals for some reason and sounded the sirens, whatever they use, the immortals. And basically he got stranded. They cut off magic access and all sorts of things for a while. And he didn't know what to do. And ultimately, he started shaping the landscape to try and get a message to any of these folks he had observed flying by in their little spaceships.
Is that what this is?
So there's one group of one group of lakes that spells out the word marooned.
Look at it; it's right there. Oh my gosh!
And a few others, numbers and letters, as he was experimenting on the process of how to shape lakes and things like this. One of the adventures in my campaign is going up, finding him, springing him from the prison of elemental evil. A sequel, yes, indeed. Nice. And then serving on his jury when the other mortals decide, all right, do we punish this guy or what? You guys have cracked him loose, and we got to deal with it. So you end up sitting in the jury along with Death himself. No, he's the prosecutor. That's right. Anyhow, sitting on a jury, dealing with these immortals, rubbing elbows with them practically. If all goes well, he gets loose. He gets a slap on the wrist, and you get some extremely valuable context to develop over your next campaign years.
So your campaign setting goes back to what, 75?
It started around. Well, really 77. I dabbled in 76, but I didn't start the design work really until 77, yeah. And it's been picked at and expanded ever since. I started with an old Judges Guild map, actually. Valen's sector of their Wilderness of High Fantasy. And they provide these wonderful maps. I'm sorry I don't have one to show you, but you would buy the pack, and it would have a blank map of a section of terrain, a coastline, and then the DM's reference that had all filled in with all the mountains and places and towns and all that. And then the players would just use the blank map and fill it in as they went. Now, I started with that, but ignored a lot of what was in the Judges Guild product for what was there and developed my own stuff. But I used the terrain, etc., and that's still the upper left coast on this is part of this Valen sector map from Judges Guild. I used to have a lot of the same names of the little towns and things, but I changed all that over the years as it evolved.
Frank, I still play in a city state of Invincible Overlord with my friend DMing.
Excellent.
Love it. Judges Guild stuff's top notch. I mean, it was all over the place back in the day, but it was still it was gold.
Nowadays, a lot of people don't realize, but TSR had only produced the Giant series.
Yeah,
that was it. They didn't even do character sheets until somebody else did it and showed them, hey, there's money here. Wake up, guys. So we all turned to the only available source of lots of adventures, some good, some bad, some in between, it varied.
Oh, great.
They had this hot new designer artist named Paul Jaquays, this tall Texas galoot, delightful guy, a bit irascible at times, very ecumenical, very deep in his religious beliefs, etc. A typical Texas native in a lot of ways. Over time, his belief changed quite a bit, and at one point, Tim Kask and I got together with Paul for lunch when we were down in North Texas for a convention, and we noticed his hair had gotten a lot longer, and he confided a lot of his inner beliefs and fears and plans for the future, and soon thereafter transitioned to become Janelle Jaquays.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we were right there with a lot of people thought, oh, wait a minute, where are the old guys going to think of this? Hell, he's a friend of ours. Now she's a friend of ours. I mean, no big deal. It's still,
unfortunately, just
now it's
passed.
Janelle.
Yeah.
used to be
Yeah, it was
Paul, but it's
wonderful. I
still
gotta-
Jaquays. It's
Yeah,
still that inimicable, top quality Jaquays things who did so many things first, who did this
Extra.
art.
I got a chance to meet her at GaryCon and went to her seminars, and it was fantastic to hear stories and stuff.
Just one of these stellar talents that came out of nowhere, went through so many challenges, etc., but saw so much from the inside there.
Frank, see what's on my wall of fame? Her Dark Tower is Dark Tower.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the all-time best.
But just such
Or
a
none.
wonderful, wonderful. You got to go all the way down before you can go all the way back up. I mean, it was crazy back in the day. So, well, that's a great story too.
If TSR's legal department had been more on the ball, they would have removed from the Jaquays version of Egg of the Phoenix, they would have removed that prefatory section in the R4 explaining how this is part of Greyhawk, but they did not catch it. It got printed officially there,
Yeah.
not just an R module, but, official mainline. So now they have to really double step around that and just try not to talk about that. No, that was an oops. Oh well.
An oopsie. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So you say that this should be east of the Solnor?
Yes, a couple thousand miles, so there won't be any interconnection.
I know what's out there now.
I did on my take on Earth on the planet. I put it in the middle.
You did put it on there, right?
A continent in the middle, and in my
I
campaign
remember
I
seeing
call
that.
I call it Mentzeri in my campaign.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yep.
So
Well, the only reason why I called it Aquaria is that it's a verbal abbreviation for Aqua Iridia. The Aqua Iridians, the seagoing folks, are the ones who first
There we go.
tried to
Yep.
colonize it. Now, in my campaign story, they run head on into the fact that this is a populated continent, and what do you mean colonize, you jerks? And the demi-humans, elves, dwarves, etc., go through several centuries of strife between them and these humans who want to come in and try and take everything over. And they end up hanging on to what is theirs, the demi-humans, and the humans are essentially relegated to river valleys and things. They seem to be big on water, so fine, let them live there. We'll keep the mountains and woods and all the good parts of the world, and that way we got them all in one place, and we can keep an eye on those mischievous humans who like to do nasty things at times and all that. Anyhow, that's my campaign flips the humanocentric entirely, and it's literally demi-human centric. And the humans are the oddballs with these terrible attitude and ideas and all, and they just have to be whopped into shape over time. Simple as that.
And do you have it south of Fireland?
Yep.
That's what I thought. That's what
in
I
the
remember.
middle of, you said a couple of thousand miles. So I literally put it a couple of thousand miles out in Solno, which is probably about 4,500 across or something.
Yeah, so out.
So I'm good with whatever names you want to give with it.
No, I'd never been there. It was just a working name for that I put in there just to honor you, so I knew where it came from, so to speak. So, yep. But
Now,
now
what
I know
would
where.
like, I had talked to Darlene when I tried to do my Kickstarter about doing this map that you see in her incredible style, from the roots of the game. I might have to live without that. We'll see whether that can be developed again.
Yeah, this is Anna's map.
I would be quite happy to have an Anna Meyer map.
We'll see. Yeah.
Um, and various other cartographers and graphic designs. I saw one, I forget who did it, but a 3D view of a mountain valley like this, as if you were there on the mountain looking down,
That is all.
extrapolated from this
Yeah.
sort of map. I just
Yep.
love that
Yep.
sort of stuff.
And
It's very
now
good.
we also know what the name Aquaria, where it comes from.
Yeah.
Aquaridia. I love it. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And that I
Yeah.
have absolutely no great fondness for it or anything. And for many years, people kept saying, "Oh, it's an ocean game." Then you have a whole underwater campaign. No, no, no. It's not an aquarium. No,
Yeah.
no. That and it gets into word games, etc. So when we eventually publish it, I'll probably call it Imperia, the name of
Yeah.
a human.
That was the
Capital.
Kickstarter name you used in the Kickstarter material.
Right. And this capital by these arrogant humans who think they can come in and take everything over, and it's the story of them being controlled and being forced to live in equality and peace with everybody else, despite their worst intentions.
Man, learned a lot tonight I didn't know, which is really so cool.
Yeah.
So some other publications in that era. So all right. So you got credit for the Egg of the Phoenix, except you were gone, but they gave you credit because you wrote it, right, basically.
Yeah, they since it was my work had been published by TSR in the R series,
Right.
they couldn't just hand wave it, so they had to include my name.
Okay.
However, if you look at the rules encyclopedia of the 4-box sets,
Right,
these
in 91.
Companion Masters, I am relegated to an also mention in a stack of about 30 names because the new management, the POG, refused to mention my name in print. Or as little as possible and just make it go away. Gygax, Mentzer, all of that. So
I looked for it, figuring why I in fact
buried in
researching
there,
it.
yeah.
I couldn't
Hardback.
locate it. Wow. Gosh.
and that was a big another major oops for TSR's business people, though not for the gamers. The rules encyclopedia of my 4-box sets is the only time in history when you could buy the entire D&D game in one book. And a fair chunk of it was devoted in full color to this Mystara world and getting you started at least on that.
Right.
So you don't have to buy all these box sets. You don't have to buy all of these, this, that, all the supplements, all the stuff that they want to sell you. All of the stuff the business folks have to sell you so that they can pay their designers, artists, pay for the building, all of this. It's all the financial structure of the business. So this was a major business oops. Oh my gosh. They buy this, they don't ever have to buy anything else ever, except dice, and we don't make the dice. So, so they got off of that kick real fast. They turned that into Troy Denning's excellent treatment, the Black Box, in the late 90s. Easy to learn, easy to play Dungeons and Dragons game. But then when Peter rescued TSR, they had that design decision, which way to go for 3.5, as I mentioned earlier. And partially Peter, partially for business reasons, to have more things to sell you, etc. They essentially turned their back on all of my sets, the whole basic line, Mystara, all of that, and went with the advanced D&D methodology, the basics, and extrapolated from there with another lots of rules style game. Like I say, for 3.5, it worked out quite well for a rule-heavy approach. But folks have pointed out to me, oh yeah, look here, in 5th edition and even in 3.5 and even in 4 in some places, you have these critters that first appeared in your stuff, and you have these rule mentions and stuff that you do that first appeared in your stuff. So they've borrowed liberally a lot of bits and pieces that the designers liked, that they knew, okay, hey, this is worth, using. So they may have gone the advanced route overall, but they have certainly paid me the backhanded compliment of including me in the credits of every one of them to this day, but also using a lot of my design ideas that were fairly innovative at the time that we didn't realize it then, but now we look back on it and say, oh, wow, yeah, that's when that first started. Happy to have been the one to introduce the world to a lot of those early things.
It's definitely great to hear some of the stories because, right, Anna, get them out there, and and see what actually transpired back then, and the things that
Yeah, I
happened.
got stories galore.
Yeah.
And I had a crazy life. I did a folk music concert at the White House for the Nixons. My sister and I did an Easter duet for the Nixons and about 20 Secret Service guys. You know, they don't mess around when he goes out in public, when the president goes out.
Wow, that's another thing.
I've swum in the president's pool at Camp David. I've traveled the world on everybody else's nickel but mine. I've always been poor because making money was never a priority. I realized early on I had to set priorities here. So I have lived on bologna and cheese and things like that while pursuing my own goals, dreams, you know, et cetera. You could say I'm Mr. Breeze from that old song. Never settled down, I've been married twice, but never produced any kids, but I always seem to keep moving on, looking for new frontiers, just my whole life.
Two other let me just share these real quick. I got two others that I know of. Here's one, the Book of Marvelous Magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the AC series. This is basic edition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's notes on converting to advanced, but at the time, once again, this was released in the United States, and everybody's playing advanced, so this is for basic, and there is what? You know, who knows? And now, decades later, this is starting to become appreciated more. They threw out a good 20% of the items, and in fairness, because a lot of them were just too silly or too run around, you know, jerk the players around, whatever excuse. But it boiled down to this. Now, Gary wrote 3 or 4 items for this out of the entire book. And the reason why illustrates Gary's generosity. He did this for various authors, artists, etc. I turned in the manuscript after a 2-week madhouse productivity thing with my girlfriend at the time, Penny Petticord, now Penny Williams, by the way, who was an RPGA coordinator shortly after I moved on. But we tossed ideas around. I still have the rough notes even, and came up with all these magic items, and I was going to turn it into TSR to be, you know, as a submission. And Gary said, no, come on, into the office. And he explained the facts of life to me. He said, okay, I'm going to propose that you let me add 1 or 2 items, you put my name on it as co-author, and then I get a chunk of the money. How does that sound? And I was, well, if you say so, boss. And he said, now, the reason why this is a good deal goes like this. Listen carefully. My royalty contract, he explained, goes to the beginning of the company. I get a percentage of retail. Your contract as an employee would be a percentage of wholesale after expenses and God knows what, and at a micro percentage compared to what the company gives me since I was in at the ground floor. So we do this, we do a little contract on the side, you get 90% of the revenues from this, of the royalties. I just throw a couple items in, we put my name on as co-author, which ain't too bad for a co-author on your work, you know, consider that for the publicity side. And this should sell like mad, and you should make a pile of money, and it did indeed make me 15 to 20 grand. It made Gary a little bit of money, but nothing compared to what he normally was making. But this is what he would do for folks who were struggling, show you ways around the system, get around the accountants and the lawyers, and this is how we can help you out. Another classic example is WG4, the Risdon, the module. You know that weird pastel cover that it had?
Yeah, because they never changed it either.
Never saw anything before or since. That was done by the mother of one of the local kids named Eric Shook. And the Shook family was involved playing the game before it was even published, things like that. He was just a toddler practically at the time, but some of Eric's input at the time became rules and things for the game. But as is typical for a lot of families in Lake Geneva, you deal with the tourist trade for part of the year, and the rest of the year you starve. And so you hit these slump periods, cash flow, things like that. And so he reached out and said, okay, we're going to have you do this cover. I sort of like your style, but we'll go with it, fine, you know, and had her, so Eric's mom got a nice check for doing that cover. And Gary wasn't afraid to break boundaries and do things like that. And all of this was hushed up. This was never revealed, that this was a way to help out some local folks who are good people, who are around since the beginning, who had some needs, you know, and this was a way he could help them. Remember, Gary was a Jehovah's Witness for most of his life. Although not all the family went that way. Luke, for one, went into the military, an entire antithesis of some of those beliefs. But with his Jehovah's Witness background and his genuine caring and love for everybody and his love of games, he just wanted to make everybody happy, you know. So you would see these illustrations behind the scenes of the benevolence, really, and the wisdom of Gary, you know, doing what he could. He sucked as a businessman. He came up with a game that he is now credited after 50 years as role-playing. He didn't even realize it was role-playing to start with. Nevertheless, he risked his life. His heart went bad on him. He destroyed his marriage. He spent almost all his money trying to build this company. He gave everything for that. So deserves a good credit appropriately, you know, of course.
Frank, I think that's a first. I don't think I've never heard that story before. Wow, I appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, I got lots of stories.
That's a great one.
I was unfortunately right around the corner when Gary and Mary were having some knockdown, drag-out fights, and I listened to an awful lot of stuff in the marital squabbles and things. But I was Gary's right arm. Like I said, I would drive him around and, you know, all sorts of stuff. So,
wow, man.
Quite an opportunity for me, though, and I certainly soaked it all up and remember almost every day of it, you know, with all the momentous stuff that was going on, looking back in retrospect now.
Here's an AD&D one you wrote. Needle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was browsing my library once and looking for ideas for a next tournament and happened to run across pictures of the British looting Egypt and the mechanisms they built, this elaborate scaffolding for tearing down an obelisk and moving it and putting it, you know, setting it up for the queen. And so I thought, hey, what an idea for an adventure series. So I wrote this up as a tournament. And in round one, you go off and you're exploring this jungle and you find this obelisk in there. I took the opportunity to put a maze underneath the obelisk with a see-through ceiling. So you start with a map of the maze, which made using a maze in a tournament game possible. Otherwise, you go crazy mapping. You know, I solved all that by giving you a map of the thing to start. I just don't give you where all the traps are and things. So you find that out and, of course, through it. At the end of round one, it's assumed you go back home by ship, etc., and brag about your exploits, and the local ruler hears about it, and the king calls you in and says, obelisk, sounds great. I want it. We're going to send you back with several hundred grunts to basically take it down and load it up on ship and bring it back, okay? All you got to do is supervise. And what you're supervising then is this huge operation, and there are these two warring tribes of, you know, these little local monstrous types. Bullywugs are one of them, then another group that looks like bullywugs, and you can't tell them apart. Just all of these role-playing, you know, conundrums come up. So you think you're there to move an obelisk, and actually you're dealing with preventing a war, trying to take care of all the disease in the jungle and all these people you're responsible for. Most people had never played a D&D game like it. When they got into this, it was, wait a minute, we're supervising 200 people? Wait a minute, we're trying to prevent a war between tribes? What is all this? You know, hey, it's D&D. You know, we're reaching out. You know, it's not hack and slash anymore. No, we're way beyond hack and slash, folks. And that story ends with, we assume, getting the obelisk back home. You put it up, and then the next full moon, a portal appears in the side of it, and the king calls you and says, it's all your fault. Of course, never mind that he told you to do this, but it's all your fault. You open this thing up, you got to go through and find out what's going on. And there it gets weird, because you go to the moon and deal with a race of interplanar traders who happen to be spiders, and they've lost their princess has been kidnapped, the Princess Keeley, and they want you to go rescue her, and if you do, they'll award you the trading contract for your planet as interplanar traders bringing stuff in from, you know, who knows, and you'll be rich beyond your wildest dreams. But you have to rescue this princess, who is a spider who looks absolutely identical to every other spider up here, and you have no way of telling them apart, and he's been enchanted, and is being guarded by, like, Tiamat or something. So it's this, oh my God, scenario in the final round of this. Just everything just goes absolutely bananas. Of course, it's not really Tiamat, but you need to figure out what's going on, so it's not really a bad spoiler. The reason why the final round is so weird you happen to see moon rocks, for example, threw the pun in. I had to. As long as you're on the moon, there's these giant birds going by, and moon rocks. Get it? Duh. No, Sinbad. No. Anyhow, the reason why that whole thing is so weird is because it was a Sunday morning tournament round for the RPGA. Picture Gen Con, and you're playing. You're lucky to get 4 hours sleep a night. You're gaming, nonstop, dealer room, and all this. You managed to make it through 2 rounds of the RPGA tournament, and the doggone final is on Sunday morning at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
So enough of the heavy tactical thinking, planning, the hairy, high-level character. No, here we go silly. This race of spiders wants you to rescue their princess, and it's just wide open, just crazy. So that's the way I generally design tournaments. The other aspect of this, of course, the needle artwork by Clyde Caldwell, the Immortal, is used by almost everybody all over the internet when they want to illustrate, a D&D party. Bang!
Yeah, that's true.
This pillow shows up. It's become so iconic in itself. And those are for the 8-person character, 8-person party I put together. And the way I do tournaments, I design the party as a well-versed, unified group, know each other, the little tricks, techniques. I was one of the first ever to write character backgrounds on tournament characters, and that kicked off. Nowadays, some people do 2, 3, 5-page backgrounds for their characters, but I started it with just a line or two or a paragraph. And so I designed this character group and then designed the adventure for them, their physical resources, their personal assets, the whole thing. And I did this a dozen times over for our PGA. And so you see these classic matchups. So the characters seem to have absolutely everything they're going to need, the characters, the skills, equipment, everything, because that's why. I start with the party and then I do the adventure. But before I can do the adventure, I have to have that seed idea of what to write about, hence the stumbling across that in a book of British history and the looting of Egypt, and bang, all the rest cascaded then from there.
So, we got some time for some questions from the audience, right? Hopefully, Anna, do you have any other questions? I know we're bouncing around for a lot.
I'm just amazed at all the cool backstories here. It's
it's great.
Yeah.
It's the first time we've heard them, so the whole community is hearing them, which is wonderful.
I do stick a lot of tidbits. Let me mention on my Facebook page. I've had that for more than 20 years. It's always been a personal page. I've always resisted making it commercial. It could allow more friends, quote unquote. And I have close to the 5,000 maximum for friends, but that's fine with me. If you really want to talk to me, you can always, my email address is given on that page. All you got to do is look. It's part of the Facebook layout. So feel free to reach out if you wish. Please do bear in mind, however, that I'm almost 75. And dealing with medical issues and all sorts of things, and dealing with the staff now, luckily, to organize my remaining materials and creations, my physical inventory of literally over 10,000 games, all sorts of stuff I have to deal with before the Reaper comes for me. But I have plans. So we're pressing ahead now at this point.
Wonderful.
So please come by my Facebook page, say hi. It'll be known that it is a PG page severely, and I do hide obscenity and graphic comments of all sorts. And as such, we try and make it an oasis of civility out there on the internet. It's gone pretty well for, like I say, more than 20 years now. And I spill an awful lot of game tidbits from my campaign, my ideas, controversial opinions, and all sorts of things. So I think you'll enjoy it if you come by. Eventually, we'll probably compile a lot of it into a book. Really, there's so much.
Awesome. That would be fantastic.
Questions from people?
Yeah. So, someone asked about your involvement with Star Frontiers.
Minimal, really. I was just part of the playtesting crew. At that stage, we were still doing playtests in people's apartments. So I remember going over to Zeb Cook's place and playtesting one of those. I like the little monkey boys. But really, I was starting to get busy with other things and couldn't devote my time to it, really. Okay. I thought it was a really excellent job. And, of course, by calling it Star Frontiers, SF, that's the SF role-playing game, duh. But truth be told, I got started on Trav, of course, as many of us
Traveler?
did.
Yeah.
Mark
Traveler was just
ahead of
its time.
Right. Just years ahead. Yeah, but the first big science fiction role playing game, and deserves every reputation it has. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I agree there. Someone asked, do you have the notes or from your original when you won the competition? Because that would be a wonderful thing to publish.
That sorry, that would be the original notes for the R2 module as it ended up.
Oh,
And
okay.
I might have them somewhere. That was the thing I used the scenario I ran to win that competition in 1980, which I then turned into the published R2 module.
Oh, okay. So you did. Okay. All right. There you go. That's a great answer.
And then after that, when I got into, I mentioned my online chat room campaign for nearly 30 years. One of the premier lead characters, one of the highest level, was a gnome illusionist thief in Fighter 2, I think, trip class. But anyhow, through that, his play, and actually that had one player for its first 20 years, and then that player resigned. He said, I spent 20 years of my life playing this stupid game. I'm done. Thank you. It's been great, but I'm out. And a new player joined up almost immediately, picked that character up and continued playing it. And then he learned huge amounts about illusions and the proper play of the class. But I may be one of the few people who has run literally decades worth of, first, very high level play, levels 15 to 25, 30, that sort of thing, on a regular basis, on just a weekly basis. And secondly, have run and worked out all the rules I need for adjudicating the entire illusionist class, which has been woefully unaddressed.
Yeah, it's tough.
Minimally addressed
for novice DM.
Throughout the history of the thing.
Yeah.
So in those two areas, I probably have more experience than almost anybody. And again, some folks I've met recently and some cohorts are leaning on me that you got to get this stuff written down before we lose you, Frank. So that's become my priority, not handling all the extra games and all the sales and that junk, but instead focusing on stuff that only I can do, some of these creative elements during the time I have left. So fingers crossed, we'll see what happens.
On a personal note, my question here is, Gen Con came over east in the early 80s, particularly I think it was 82. It was at Widener University. Were you at that?
Yeah, I had just started the RPGA. We had run a couple of things in 81. And in 1982, I had come up with this idea for a new tournament series that would span not only Gen Con East at Widener College in Chester, Pennsylvania, in 82, but then the first 3 rounds of the tournament, and the next 3 rounds would be at Gen Con then at UW Parkside months later. There were 4 or 5 people that were sure played in both events, both Gen Con East and Gen Con. And this new idea I came up with was, like I say, a 6-part tournament where you go through 3 rounds of something and then you continue the story at Gen Con with 3 more rounds. And it was a no-brainer once I worked out the pacing, the rod of 7 parts. Duh. So you start with 1, and this is the first ever official TSR treatment of the rod of 7 parts. Not to take anything away from the 2E version by Skip Williams, published many years later. Beautifully done, but I produced the first Rod of 7 Parts adventure. Me being weird, it is for a group of dwarves who have to hijack a human mage with a quest scroll because they don't have anybody in their race who can cast magic spells, and they need one because one of their number has gotten a hold of the first part of this rod. And so they go through all these challenging situations in the 3 rounds there and then 3 rounds at Gen Con. And this is now one of these legendary tournaments to a lot of the collectors. First, you can almost never find any copies of it. It was never actually published by TSR. It's the only time a tournament has spanned 2 different conventions like that. Just all of these firsts, and then a bunch of dwarves, and in the final round, they end up on the plane of air. So can you imagine anything more ludicrous than a bunch of dwarves floating around on the elemental plane of air saying, all right, now what do we do? It's through every situation in the book, Adam.
So they exist. Those docs exist somewhere, right?
Yeah, I recently uncovered a full copy of the rod with all maps, characters, the whole thing.
Awesome.
I also found one copy of the first round that had actually been used to prepare for the actual tournament, so I popped that on eBay because I need money for my med expenses. Oh well. So I'm content in my head to let go of a few bits and pieces like that. But once again, like with so many other things, we're looking at potentially entering it all in Word and just publishing the whole thing
So,
at some point.
let me discuss something with you real quick here. We Leonard Lakofka came on the show like 40 times. He would show up when he wasn't even invited, show up, hang out for like a half hour,
Oh,
and then
great
just
guy.
leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Grail community's been putting together stuff, and we're finding that he ran at cons, he never published, and
Sure.
converting them into and they're basically freebies, but like it's called the Lakofka Archive. So we're
Right.
finding these, and these are two of them from last year, and we
Glad
got
somebody's doing it. There's a
right.
wealth of material there.
So
And I have mentioned this to others and said, it might not be a surprise to you. When I put my Kickstarter together about 7 years ago, I commissioned Len to do an inn at a crossroads run by an interesting individual, and it was very detailed. The only thing at the crossroads is this inn, in this whole complex. I paid for it, then the Kickstarter crashed, so it's still in my archives, all of his maps, his whole design, and at some point that also will be published. A totally unseen, unknown bit of Lakoffa, a nice little mini scenario there for this place. So watch for that coming also sometime soon. I do own the rights, I paid him for it.
Yeah.
I can't deprive the gaming world of an original Lakofka like this, so it will be coming out at some point.
That's great to know that there's other stuff that exists out there.
Yep.
But like, if there are some of yours that are written and they were done at a con, and you just one off and you have it, I mean, if you want to reach out to us, maybe we could do the same thing for you, just to get your stuff out there. You're saying you want to make sure it's so just
At this stage, though, some folks have looked at this long chat room game that I have logs for and all that we need to boil down into something readable. The 2 or 3 or 4 dozen epic adventures that and stories that I told over the 45 years I've been doing this. And so a couple of people are talking about starting up a company just to publish the remainder of unseen Frank stuff. There's just so much of it.
It needs to be done. It absolutely needs to be done. So that's great to hear. Very, very
but
good.
I am certainly not up to driving that car at this stage of my life.
Right.
So I'm happy to cooperate and co-author with people or do whatever. A lot of this is in typical rough note form, just like your home games.
Absolutely.
Everybody out there, how rough this stuff
Chicken
is.
scratch in a notebook. I know, man.
So, but one direction I would like to explore, businessmen permitting, instead of adding all this fluff, flavor text, writing out big long sentences with blah 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 blah, and you skip half of that after you bought the product, you're going to run it your way with your phrasing, your presentation, and I want to junk the fluff. Basically, boil it down to a shorter, smaller product, and say, here's the basic points you need to cover. Extrapolate your head off from here. But I'm not going to make you sit and read stuff to the players and do all that. I believe in you as quality game masters, and I want to give you just like a bare bones plus to run an adventure with and see what you think of that. Instead of all this extra stuff to add extra pages to run the price up so that the company guys can make money and all that. Try a different approach here.
So let's see what else. Yeah, what great information. So we know. Wow, there's something by Len.
I'm still full of a lot of ideas.
Yep.
One of the things I want somebody to do is start up a global database of gamers. You pick your screen name, you put in your postal code, you select from a huge drop-down list of, here are the 75 games that I have played. Here are the few that I am looking for players. Here are the ones I don't like anymore. And you just put up your gaming profile like that and then have a built-in messaging system where you can reach out, set up online games, or if you're daring, face-to-face games based on your postal codes and things. You also need postal codes to decide time zones because I deal with my Italian friends and Japanese, so I'm dealing with time zones all over the world very often. On Facebook, this can get real interesting, timing some of my posts to hit certain readerships, shall we say. But I want a database where any of us can go in that's either dirt cheap, like $1 a month, maybe. I'd pay $1 a month to be part of this, but just a way to find other gamers and align our gaming interests and take advantage of the internet and set up online games of this and that and all that sort of thing. Now, somebody should do this and build
There are
serious-
several
couple,
services,
yeah.
similar services like that starting to
Well,
come built
somebody
in with
needs to-
VTTs and stuff
Somebody
like
needs
that
to
too.
kick it in gear
Yeah.
PR wise and go for the position of, I mean, the best example I can come up with is this relatively minor British gamer who came up with this idea called N-World.
Yep.
And now N-World is the one giving out the awards at the major cons and things. You know, they have built themselves into an authority figure. So one of these database people needs to just take the initiative, dump money into advertising, build this, and become the global database of gamers. It's not an area where you want a lot of competition. You want a unified, you know.
Yeah, Ed
Not
Greenwood's
like search engines where, yeah, you can get different things out of different ones. No, this is the common connector. And,
Ed Greenwood's assistant was working on that actually.
if somebody would just float that, I would be happy as a clam. That's the one thing I've waited for 40 years to see, or 30, looking at the internet. I did my first interview on the internet in 1986 on CompuServe.
Oh my
And
gosh.
a lot of our readers won't believe me when I say, yes, there was an internet in 86.
Yeah.
Really minimal, but in ARPANET was the big one that we were watching, and then other things like AOL took over and just surprised the heck out of us.
Yeah,
Way
it's-
back when.
It's come a long way. I mean, our Grail community is really thriving, and we have discords with that, you know, finding gamers and stuff, but it's not a database, you know. So it's and we got all, you know, there's 10 streamers doing this. My 7th annual St. Jude fundraiser is coming up this next weekend.
Cool.
It's for 4 straight days of gaming for that. So there's a lot. We got a lot of community, but we don't have a specific database mechanism. You know, that's something that
So that's my number one recommendation
Okay.
in the big picture.
Yeah.
Somebody should do that.
So, anything you'd like to say in closing? I know we'll keep you beyond the 2 hours the normal show is here, you know, because but we really appreciate you coming on and just chatting with us, and we're hearing some
it's
unbelievable.
wonderful. Yeah.
I think it's gone pretty well. I hope
Yeah.
I didn't
Oh, yeah.
step on my tongue or screw the
No,
food.
it was fantastic.
Bad.
Yep.
Yeah,
I have had, it's been interesting what life has thrown me, but I've had so much experience with video, literally all over the world, and my head goes too fast to start with, that it's been noted that when I am addressing you folks and talking on a show like this, I speak in whole sentences and paragraphs and not the usual and, you know, and erps along the way, that my head works like this. It's got the paragraph written, edited, revised, and, you know, ready for delivery before it even gets near my lips. So it's just one of these weird Frank things.
well,
It's served me well, though, over the years with interviews and video and things like that, and I trust it has come off reasonably well here tonight.
It's
Absolutely.
come on really well.
us
Yeah,
Philly
come on,
people
great.
talk fast. We do. We do. And people are like, what the hell did you say? You know, I get busted my stones all the time with the way I say I say total sounds like turtle, right? You know, and all the other stuff at home and all the other things they get me on. So.
And of course, being from Philadelphia, we always drink a lot of water.
Water. Yep, absolutely. You got it. 100%. So, but we really appreciate you coming on. So,
Lots of fun.
yeah, definitely. We're going to do so just one shout out for tonight, all right? And then we're going to do the
Yeah,
giveaways
yeah,
for
we
everyone.
skip
We'll
it
see
for
who wins that
Wednesday.
box
Yeah.
set.
All right.
All right?
Yeah, that's
yeah,
sweet.
yeah. So
Thanks again for that donation.
yeah, that's Lee Savage Baron. Very kind of you to do that. Just please note, we will
Yep.
be back on. Normally, we're not on Monday nights, but because Frank was coming on tonight, we have the 7th annual St. Jude fundraiser, the Grail Mega Stream fundraiser. Topic this year is Undead Tumult, so it's all gonna be crazy sorts of undead. The Predator show's tomorrow night at 7. We're gonna have a live streamers on talking about what they're gonna do. And this starts Thursday evening and runs all the way through to Sunday evening. So 4 days of streaming. Last year we raised $26,271. We're going to try and surpass that this year. This is year 7 of the fundraiser. Yeah, so it's been a little baby of mine every year. I can't believe we're 7th year on Twitch doing this. So that'll be tomorrow night, and then it'll be a normal week for the most part until we get to Thursday. Well, Friday and Saturday there'll be a ton of different streams going on. So, yep. Alrighty, so let's do the giveaway here, and as you can see, my background. Oh, yeah, I got changed. Always is changing. So it's Temple Member for the greatest module of all time. We did. So Gary Julian's on. I don't know if you know Gary right now. Frank Gary wrote the third edition Living Grail Gazetteer. He's him and Eric Mona. So yeah, we're going to do a top modules of all time for Greyhawk, like they did back in 2005 in Dungeon Magazine. We're going to do one. We're going to have Eric Mona and a bunch of people on. So Gary's putting that up in chat. Cool. We need to do that. So yeah, that's coming up.
I go way back with Eric, back to RPGA days. Yeah.
Cool. Eric is playing Saturday in my fundraiser game. So
cool.
Eric's a great guy. So all right, here we go. Last call, exclamation point drawing. Remember, the first winner gets the red box set. I will need you to whisper me your full name and address, okay? And I'll get that to Lee, and Lee will either send it, or if you're coming to GaryCon, he can hand it over to you, okay? So let's either or. So let's do that real quick. Second winner will get the revised Gazetteer and the Treasures of Greyhawk, unless you already have them. All right? I know it's a consolation gift this time, but still, here we go. I'm going to close it out. And let's see who wins. Thank you. Thank you very much. Fantastic stream because Frank is so kind with his time and the stories.
What? I won the red box?
The winner is Doc Shoulder, a regular. Doc, congrats.
Awesome.
Congrats, Doc Shoulder. And the second winner, Brungale, who's the sponsor for the fundraiser even. He's got a bunch of stuff we're going to show tomorrow night. So, and he'll get the reprints there. So Doc is the winner. Holy crap, Doc says. Doc, come on, man. You've been around for 7 years. You deserve it. So Doc, I probably have your full name and address. Just re-whisper it to me or Discord it to me again, and I'll get it over to Lee. Because Doc, I don't think you're coming to GaryCon, correct? Yeah. So we're going to raid into Darling now. Frank, any final thoughts? I'd love to have you back for some specific topics. Because we didn't really get into depth into DMing. Maybe for a DM's roundtable discussion, where I have a couple other DMs and we have ask general DMing questions.
I have been known to wax lyrical on dozens of different topics and have some people actually want to hear it. So yeah,
awesome.
I'd be glad to come back and tackle other things.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, it's normally this time slot, 7:00 on a Sunday night. So we didn't have it last week because of the Eagles game. You know what I mean? So it's a Super Bowl, but.
Well, of course.
What a wonderful, wonderful thing. One last thing.
Go Birds.
Yeah, it was so great. It was such a great game. One last question.
That one pass was just, oh my God, level. I mean, just.
It was, and there was no stress. It was stress-free, which was great. So, all right, there you go. Lee and Doc will get together. You're going to pick it up at GaryCon. Perfect.
I have one request of everybody watching.
Please, yes.
During this year, 2025, please teach somebody how to play a game.
Absolutely.
It could be a kid, an adult, it could be Pinochle, it could be a role-playing game, whatever. But keep the hobby going. The idea of playing games as a hobby, interacting face-to-face, not online, please. Teach somebody face-to-face how to play a game. That's all I got to ask.
Wonderful.
My last question is, did you still play with your original group going all the way back to the 70s? You still get together once in a blue moon?
Thanks to this new convention in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo page, they have been doubling each of their first 2 years, and they're going to double or triple this next year. And thanks to them remembering that I came from the Philly area and inviting me back to be one of their first guests, and since I'm poor, they're covering the cost, so this makes it possible to get back to my old stomping grounds, and so I've been able to reunite with a lot of folks I hadn't seen for years. Just this last one, a month ago, I finally saw my girlfriend of 45 years ago for the first time since.
Oh my gosh!
And we had that. It all worked out. No, it's not happening again, but great to see you, etc. I got caught up on a lot of things.
That's so wonderful.
So it's really been excellent, and I intend to return to Page every year, see my old friends in the area, as well as gamers, new and old, and so hope to see you folks there.
Oh, absolutely. You'll definitely. I think we'll talk before that and get in a DMs roundtable before that. But all of us are as VIP guests, the community. We got a lot going. Even more will go next year, knowing how successful it's been. It's getting into the bigger area now. Next year, we're going to have our own streaming area too. I've been told from Ron and Phil.
And big manufacturers, not just small folks
Right.
and dice sellers and things like
Right,
that.
the entire front area is just going to be vendors where we were
They're
before.
about to explode. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to be a wonderful time. So, all right, well, everyone, we're going to wait into Darling like we normally do on Wednesday, on Sunday nights. I'll see you all tomorrow night for the prelude for the fundraiser, and then we'll go Wednesday, Thursday, and then all the events going on during the weekend. We'll talk about that. So we'll see you all tomorrow. Frank, thank you so very much. Anna, see you tomorrow. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
All righty. I'm going to hit a wrong button. I didn't hit many wrong buttons tonight, but I probably will here. So,
Good job.
yeah. All right. Let me raid into Darling and get us out of here. So, set the raid up. Thank you all for the support tonight. I really appreciate it. What a wonderful stream.
Did it win?
Yeah, it went very. Let's see here. Darling didn't show up on here. She should have.
Yeah, I had one video editor in southern Italy come to me and say, "You just saved me 3 hours. Your delivery in this interview, man, I had the evening set aside for editing, and now I get to go out with my girlfriend."
Oh, that's cool.
That's great.
5, 4, 149 going in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See you tomorrow night. Thank you. Wow, that may be one of our top 3 highest rates of all time there.
Oh wow. Yeah. 149. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
So Frank, yeah, we'll be.
Already time. Are we off the air now?
Yeah, let me hit one more button and we're off. We are off now.